everyone and welcome to Extreme Graphics Tech. My name is Angelo and today I'm going to dedicate this video to a very great car, the GTX 1080, that this year is going to be 7 years old. This car came out in 2016. I can't believe how fast time is flying. And anyway, I did a test of this car 2 years ago on my Spanish channel. I was testing if the 1080 was still good in 2021, and I did a giveaway, and I gave away a 1080. I had two because I was using them on SLI, and I wanted to give something back to my Spanish subscribers, so I gave one of them away to one of the winners. So maybe when we get to 10,000 subscribers in the English channel, I will do the same for whatever video card we are at the moment. However, what I wanted to say about this one is that obviously at the time I tested a bunch of games that I'm not going to be testing today, because today we are going to be testing if the 1080 is still good in 2023, and for that we are going to be testing newer games. I know already this car is very good for Red Dead Redemption 2, The Witcher, Cyberpunk, and games from the past, but what has happened between 2021 and 2023? So that's what I want to be testing here, and to see if the car is still able to play new games, and so how good can you play with it, and what resolution and quality. I have to say that I believe the 10 series of Nvidia is probably one of the best series Nvidia has released. They were priced correctly, they had at the time the correct amount of VRAM, and the performance was unbelievable. Even to this day, many people still can play with the 1060, the 1070, and today we're going to be testing the 1080. And let's not talk about the 1080 Ti, which is 11 gigabytes of VRAM and is a beast of a car. However, I don't have one, I want, but they are still quite pricey in the used market. The 1080 at the time of release was a lot cheaper than the 1080 Ti. There was a big gap in difference. However, right now that gap is also wider in the used market, so you can get this one for very good price. Or decent price, however. I am not going to be talking about exactly what price, because every country is different, and I always get comments, oh, that car costs this much here, and so it seems like they try to invalidate the prices I'm trying to put sometimes. So let's see so these 6 games I tested with the 1080, and then let's talk about my conclusions. Okay, and I'm going to start with one favorite of mine, which is the Dying Light 2. At the time I tested this car in 2021, this game was not out, so I didn't test it, and I don't remember testing it when the actual game came as part of my benchmarks. So as you can see, we can play this at 1440p with FSR in quality mode, which is important because we are not damaging too much the image, and with medium settings, and we are getting more than 60 FPS. Sometimes it's quite big, the difference it makes without and with FSR, because if you don't activate FSR, then it goes very low, like between 50 and 60. So here we can get a very nice and playable experience with a game that is looking even better than on consoles, I would think. So yeah, the GTX 1080 is on a good start right now. I like this game. I think the graphics are great. So we are going with a big start here. The next game I tested is Elden Ring, and weirdly enough I found that this is one of the most heavy areas at the beginning of the game. I think it's because of all the trees and foliage and stuff like that. We're playing on 1440p max settings. Obviously this game has some optimization issues, and even so we can play above 45 FPS, between 50 and 60. However, when you go to other areas, the game will go to 60, no problems whatsoever. So I think there is something about this particular area, which all the foliage, that makes this car suffer a little. However, remember, you don't have to play a max settings. You can lower the settings a little bit, or lower the resolution. Unfortunately, this game doesn't have FSR. They put ray tracing, but I think FSR will have been better. However, as I said, this is something that is going to be running quite good if you lower your expectation in terms of settings, but still I think it's going to look wonderful, and it's going to run great if you do that. As you can see here, we are achieving 60 FPS at some point, so by playing a high, we're probably going to get steady 60 FPS. Hogwarts Legacy is one of the newest game in this test, and you can see that the game is running very well. Even in Hogsmeade, we are using 1440p high with FSR on quality once again, and the game is honestly running very, very good. Even when flying and going into different areas like the castle and so on, the game keeps a steady 60 FPS. There could be like a lower to 58, but you wouldn't notice if you were not looking at the graph there. Those little 50 to 52 FPS is mostly because of loading, or it's loading a new area, so it stutters a little bit, but after that the game is quite steady. However, you can always lower resolution. As I said, maybe 1440p is already too much for this car. I don't like to think so. I like to push things, and I think the GTX 1080 is showing its muscle here, and it's showing how great of a car and how good it is, still going for a 6-year-old car that came out. No, 6 is actually 2016. It's 7-year-old car. Now Resident Evil 4 is another game, and I'm using one of the heaviest areas on the system where you don't get like a steady 60. But once again, I'm using 1440p because I like to push this game. I'm using the balance preset, and you can use something like FSR or interlace video mode to steady those frames. I didn't use them because I don't think it looks so good, but you can obviously do that just in order for having a more steady FPS. In this case, you're going to see the game going from 50 to 60, and if you want to have those perfect 60 FPS, I would recommend using like FSR in quality mode. It doesn't look as good, but it's better to having that dance of frames per second. However, once again, I'm going to say this: you can play this game at 1080p if you want, and you will enjoy a much higher than 60 FPS, and you're going to have a great experience with a GTX 1080. Honestly, this is a very, very good car still, considering how old it is. It's honestly amazing car, I will say, and I love the GTX 10 series, and they were great cars. Returnal is a game that ran magnificent. You can see here is running at 1440p high FSR quality, and once again we are above 60 FPS at all times. This is a very fast-paced game that requires reflexes, that require very good FPS, and I couldn't see anything particularly wrong with this game. No stutterings or anything like that. Maybe one thing here or there where it needs to load a new area, but nothing major, so it didn't affect my enjoyment of the game. And with the GTX 1080, this is running just perfectly fine. And as you can see here, this car is allowing you to enjoy very new games that came only on the new or actual generation of consoles. So imagine that. How many GPUs can say that after 7 years? This is just unbelievable. And I love in the GTX 1080, even when many think that 8GB of VRAM is not enough nowadays, which I have my opinions, and there is a video about it before this one, so you can look at that if you want. Finally, I'm testing a new car and racing game. In this case, is the Need for Speed Unbound. I'm not using FSR or any scaling. What I'm using is DRS, which is the dynamic resolution scaling. What I meant was reconstruction before. This is dynamic resolution scaling to keep the frames at 60. And as you can see, because I'm running at 1440p, sometimes the game goes to 70 FPS at 1440p, and it only lowers the resolution when it needs to, which I think is a good trade-off to having this game look as good as it does in medium quality. As you can see, the textures and everything still looks great, no problems whatsoever. So still, those 8GB of VRAM are more than enough for these sort of games. You can see there is using only 6 gigs of VRAM, so that's quite good at this quality and at this frame rate. So yes, the GTX 1080, from my point of view, 7 years after, is still a gaming beast, no doubt in my mind. I realized I wasn't recording with the right microphone, so I hope it sounds better now. Anyway, after checking those 6 games that were released between 2021 and now, I have to say I'm blown away by how good this car still is 7 years after. Many cars after 7 years, you have to sacrifice a lot of quality to play any game or recent games. So I don't know if the car was very good at the time, or gaming as such hasn't evolved that much in 7 years. But I'm testing games like Hogwarts Legacy, the new Need for Speed, the Returnal, Dying Light 2, Resident Evil 4 Remake, and all those games run really, really well. As you saw, we could play most of those games at 1440p, sometimes using DRS or FSR just to help, get that performance level straight, or sometimes I push too much and went for higher quality. However, you can still select like going to play at 1080p and having a higher quality or more FPS. This card is still really good for gaming. So obviously it always depends on price. If you find this card, I will say, is around the same performance, sometimes better, sometimes worse, as a 3060, an RTX 3060. Of course, the 3060 had advantages like support for DLSS, ray tracing, and 12 gigabytes of VRAM. So if the price of a 3060 is the same as a 1080, I would spend the money on a 1080 evidently. But if you get like a very good price for a cheap machine you're trying to build, or it's your first machine, or you're trying to upgrade from like the likes of a 1060 or a 580 or something around those lines, well, I have to say this card still provides very good performance, very good resolution, and very good quality. And then of course you can play with those parameters, just maybe less resolution and more FPS, or more quality and less FPS. It depends on what you want. But I have to say, still 7 years down the road, this card is still very good. And the 8 gigabytes of VRAM, I don't think are going to be any problems whatsoever, because you're not going to be playing at 4K with this card or with ray tracing. So I think this card has still at least 2 more years of life. And in 2 years, I'm going to be testing this again, and we are going to see where we are at. But it's really quite an impressive card. And when talking about other things like emulation, this card will probably give you very good performance when it comes to emulate any system up to PlayStation 3. No problems whatsoever. I don't think you are going to have any issues. You need a good CPU for the likes of PlayStation 3, but for Wii U or anything under that, you will play with this card at probably a 4K maximum quality, no issues whatsoever. So honestly, I'm still blown away. This was my own card. It's the one I used for a couple of years on SLI. And I have a very special fondness of it. And at the time, I remember thinking this car was a massive and huge. You can see this is a Aorus model, which is one of the biggest one and normally best one at the time. And now you can see that this car is honestly normal size compared to even my 3060, RTX 3060 that I tested recently, that is like super huge and bigger than this one. So now these are things of the past. However, as I said, I think the GTX 1080 is still a very, mythical card that is giving you many years of more performance and more gaming. So if you're playing like a 1080 or 1440p and you don't mind sacrificing a little bit of quality, like medium settings sometimes, you're going to have a very good time. And as I said, I do believe this card is going to last at least another 2 years. And that's just to play at a very good quality. I think it will last longer than that, as long as you are willing to sacrifice more details and things. But honestly, I see this car running for 10 years and is still providing a very good performance, unless AMD and Nvidia the next release they do something quite drastic and they blow the performance away with lower to tier mid-tier cars. So as I said, if you find this car anywhere at a cheap price on your country that you consider is worth it, then don't worry about performance, because you're going to have very, very good time with it. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you subscribe, give that like button a press, and well, see you next time. Thank you very much.